Hello and welcome to 5 Minutes of Postgres. My name is Lucas, and today I want to talk about 4 new features in Postgres 16 that you might not know about yet. We'll start with 2 blog posts on Luca Ferrari's personal blog. In the first post here, Luca talks about 2 new functions that help you validate input to Postgres. Let's say you have a timestamp value, and you want to be using that to, for example, insert into a timestamp column or cast to a timestamp. And what you want to make sure is that this is actually a legitimate timestamp that Postgres will not error on. In Postgres 16, you can use this new pginput function against the value that you're passing in, together with the data type that you want to validate, and will tell you whether it's a valid argument for a data type or not. We can also use the pginput function to get any details on the error message. Let's take an actual case where that is an error. Here we have the year 1978, but we have the month 19. In Postgres 16, you can use pginput as valid, and it will actually give you false. This is not a correct timestamp. If you use the input error function, it will tell you this is because that datetime field value is out of range. Also suggests you might need a different date style setting. Sometimes date styles could be different. So for example, this could be a valid year, day, month timestamp, just not a valid year, month, day timestamp. This is very useful when you're using pl/pg_SQL functions, because previously you'd have to go through a lot of trouble to catch these errors that Postgres would throw on your input. But now you can actually check whether the input is correct. And if the input is not correct, you could, for example, decide to output a custom error message that talks about those details, or parse the input in different ways altogether. Luca also had a good blog post about the new \watch improvement in Postgres 16. This is on the client side, so in order to make use of this, you will have to make sure that your pSQL, locally or wherever you're running it, is actually upgraded to Postgres 16. You could also use this in older Postgres servers, by the way. It's just the client that needs to be updated for this. \watch is essentially a very convenient way to run the same query again and again on a particular interval. And it's been in pSQL for quite a number of releases. In this case, we're doing a select star from pgstat progress cluster, and we do \watch 5. So every 5 seconds, we run the query and we show the result of that query on the console. Now, the problem is that I have to actually stop that command once I no longer need it. And so I have to remember to do Control-C. Otherwise, as long as my terminal is active, this will just keep running and running. And that doesn't seem ideal. There are some hacks how you could have done this in earlier releases. But the nice thing is that now in Postgres 16, what we can do is specify how often at most we want to issue the command. So here, for example, we can say \watch I equals 2, C equals 7, I standing for interval and C standing for count. That means the statement that we're running here would be run 7 times every 2 seconds, and then will automatically stop. It's just a really nice convenience. Even if you set this to 10 or 100, we'll make sure that at some point it stops issuing these statements automatically. Now, switching gears a little bit, coming back to data input. Peter Eisentraut added a feature to Postgres 16, which is the ability to specify numbers with additional separators for thousands in the numeric literal. Imagine you're specifying 1 million as a number in your SQL query, and you want to make sure it's easier to read. And on many programming languages, what you can do is you can actually use underscores to make it easier to understand where the thousands separators are. So in a million, you'd have 1 underscore, 3 zeros, another underscore, another 3 zeros. The same idea applied to Postgres is what Peter made an effort to add. The hard part here was not necessarily making the change in Postgres, but making sure that nothing breaks from a backwards compatibility perspective, and also to make sure that this is standard SQL, not just a particular Postgres feature. Peter goes into more details in this blog post, but the gist of it is that he actually went through all the effort and got this into the new SQL standard, SQL 2023. Now we can rely on this new feature in Postgres 16 with these separators for numbers, not just as a Postgres feature, but as a SQL standard feature. Really useful if you want to make your queries more readable. Now, last on Postgres 16, I want to point out something that we actually talked about previously in 5 Minutes of Postgres episode 50. And this is part of a blog post that Paul Ramsey wrote on using the Postgres random functions. This is a good post, and I would encourage you to read it. But I want to recall one thing that Paul pointed out here, which is a new random normal function. If you're using random functions in Postgres to generate data, sometimes you want your data to have a certain structure, a certain kind of distribution of the randomness. With Postgres 16, what you can do is use the random normal function to get a particular distribution of randomness that follows a normal distribution so that you can have your data shaped in a certain way. For example, if you combine this with generate series, it can be very useful for benchmarking data as well. Now last, I lied, there's actually one more thing I want to talk to you about, and this is a Postgres 15 edition that Bruce Momjian recently blogged about. Bruce talks about setting per user variables. What he means is configuration settings that affect a particular user or a particular connection. In older Postgres releases before Postgres 15, not 16 but 15, you had to go through a lot of trouble to have ways to have non-super users set log statement, for example, on a per connection basis. On Postgres 15, you can use the new grant set on parameter syntax to grant permission to change the setting on a per connection basis to individual non-super users. And I mostly mentioned this because I forgot that this was a change in Postgres 15, and I could see myself using this to make my systems work better for non-super users. So great addition as well, that of course is also in Postgres 16 as well as in Postgres 15. Thanks so much for listening. This was 5 Minutes of Postgres. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear about next week's episode, and talk to you next week.